The good folks at Comics for Fun and Profit have been doing 2 episodes a week for quite some time now, and it's all thanks to, first of all, Jason, and second of all, our patrons who allow us to add the space on our server, broadcast more, store more, share more with you, the listeners. I'm envious of those of you who have unlimited storage and media server capabilities. We pay for ours here at the C4 FAP. It ain't cheap. We thank you so much for those of you who go to patreon.com/comicsfunprofit and contribute at any level to say thanks, to say, I want to be a part of your Slack channel conversations. I want to get exclusives. I want to get early access. I want to get ad-free access. I want to get swag. I want to get some free stuff. Whatever your reasoning is, we appreciate it at any level because it does make a difference. So from the bottom of Kyle and I and Jason's heart, thank you for contributing.
Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing writer Richard Mommsen. He's here to promote an original graphic novel by Water, the Felix Manz Story. This graphic novel was co-written by Richard and Jason Lansel. I'm sorry.
That's correct. Jason Lansel. Mm-hmm.
Lansel, okay. And art by Sanka Banerjee. And this graphic novel is from Plough Publishing. Is that correct?
That is correct. Plough.
Oh, I'm sorry. Plough. Okay. So this graphic novel will be available when this interview is released. Richard, welcome to the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. I'm doing great. Looking forward to talking to you.
No, thank you very much, Richard. Now, Richard, I'll be honest with you. I try to, I scoured the internet. I try to look up some of your information, what kind of work you do. Now, and also and of course, I also looked through what Hannah sent me through the press release. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are a screenwriter, a podcast producer, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, an archivist and records manager at the Brudenhof Historical Archives. Is that correct? And
the Bruderhof is an Anabaptist intentional community that I'm a member of. Yeah, so I've done a number of different things, and my work as a script writer, both for video on internet platforms, and also I've done some film and then some for script writing for the stage. That's what kind of got me into this project, because you can kind of look at a graphic novel in a way as a movie, right?
Yes.
You have somebody who's a creative director, you have a script writer, and you have an artist. So my job was to work on the story arc and on the dialogue, and then I passed it on to Jason, who was more of what you would think of as the producer director for the book. He is an artist himself, and actually drew a lot of the concept drawings. But then we brought on Sanka Banerjee, who's an artist in Calcutta, India, who's had a lot more experience than either Jason or I in producing graphic novels, and we asked him to actually do the final artwork. So that was how the partnership worked out, and it was a really fun, creative working together. All of us from kind of different backgrounds.
Oh yes, it's incredible. And then and if I remember correctly, I looked up Sanka's one of his past works that he's done in graphic novel form was The Count of Monte Cristo, if I remember correctly. And I'm sorry, listeners, I don't know what publisher he went through with that, but I know he did the artwork on that. Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely check Sanka out. He's Banerjee.Sanka on Instagram, and you can see a lot of his artwork samples. He's Hindu, so a lot of his work relates to sort of myths and similar material from his religious background and cultural background. So very interesting stuff.
Yes. So okay. Now, before I start the interview, I want to give Hannah Bahedri of Superfan Promotions a big shout out for asking us, the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast, to do this interview. And She did all the work behind the scenes, ranging from coordinating this interview and providing me a review copy of By Water. Now, and I also want to give a shout out to a friend of the show, because Richard, you talked to Brad Gullickson of the Comic Book Couples Counseling, because I got some of my information from Brad's article, Knocking the Dust Off History with By Water, the Felix Manz Story. And that is a written article that's dated on March 11th. And listeners, if you guys get a chance, please check out that written interview that Brad and Richard did. It's very good. So yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was great talking to him.
Now, before I start, where can listeners follow you on social media?
So I myself am not on social media, but you can follow you can follow Jason Lanzel, who's the creative director and artist behind By Water. He's at Jason Lanzel, JASONLANDSEL on Instagram. And also check out Sanka Banerjee, as I mentioned, banerjee.sanka on Instagram as well. And then if you're on Twitter, we have a handle for the book. It's at RadRefHeroes, Heroes of the Radical Reformation.
Yes.
And you can also follow the publisher. Well, you'll see more information about the book and upcoming volumes. That's at Plough on Twitter, PLOUGH on Twitter.
Richard, off the cuff, and please do not take this, I'm not being sarcastic, and don't take this the wrong way. I think that's cool that you're staying off social media. It's
well, yeah. Mm-hmm. As you can see, I don't have this is my first book, and so I've never really had to be on for professional reasons, and seems to be working out fine without it.
Oh yes, yeah, because it's kind of like, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of digressing, but it's kind of nice because I mean, it's literally, it's like going back, when I was growing up, back in the 70s and 80s, we never had the internet, we never had social media. You don't get the barrage of all these news or even sometimes clickbaits. I'm going to be honest, even clickbaits where you click on something, it's like, well, the article didn't say anything to me, Yeah,
it's a lot of time that could be wasted.
No, and that's true. No, that is very true. So, all right, I'm gonna just jump right in. So, By Water, the Felix Manz Story. Now, I'm gonna read a quote that writer Mark Russell gave for this story. Quote, "Both the writing and the art of By Water are thoroughly researched and open a fascinating window into Reformation, not only as a period of great religious upheaval, but also as the growing pangs of a society struggling to emerge from the past." I have to stop. I think that, to me, that captures, what you guys are trying to tell in this story. Is that correct?
That's great. Yeah, and that's a very generous appraisal of the book by Mark, and it's true. Jason's really been thinking about this story for a long time, and just doing a huge amount of deep research. Not just into the radical reformers, but also into the time period. What was going on in the 1500s? How did people, live? What did they eat?
Yes.
How did, crime and punishment work? How did people, work? What work did they do? Recreation. He even visited with his son and his wife. They visited Zurich and the surrounding areas to do the research for this book. And he did a lot of photography, walked in a lot of the same places that these radical reformers walked, and just really marinated in the history. So everything you see in the book, has either historical or, a visual backing to it. So that's what makes it, I think, a unusually powerful piece of work.
Yes, and I'm kind of jumping a little ahead, because since you already mentioned that Jason and his family, visit, the areas, some of the areas where Felix, lived and so forth. Did you guys talk about the experience? Did he tell you what his experience were like when he actually was there? And I'll let you add from that point on. Sorry.
Yeah, he definitely did. And I guess what's amazing about Jason's connection to this story is it's actually quite personal. His wife his wife Doris is actually a direct descendant of these radical reformers. She and Jason are both Anabaptist Christians who live in an intentional community like these believers, like these radical reformers did. So that connection is part of his heritage.
Yes.
An important part of his family's story. So I think for him to visit those sites was with his son and his wife was extremely meaningful, and just added a lot of texture then to the art and how the story ended up looking on the page.
And then I'm gonna jump also a little bit further, because I'm gonna ask, for listeners, because I'm not Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic school, did all the mass and everything, and even we talked about how I did. We had to take a class on religion history. I'm a Christian, but I'm going to ask you, for some of our listeners that don't know, what is Anabaptist? What is an Anabaptist? What are their beliefs?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think many listeners will be aware of generally of the Reformation, how
Yes.
The Bible was translated into the vernacular from Latin, so common people in Western Europe could read it after years of just having it read by priests in Latin, and many of them couldn't understand it. And there was a big movement, ad fontes in Latin, which means back to the sources. So these people, many of them common people, were reading these source materials, and what they were reading really inspired them that in some ways they've been misled by the state church and by the authorities. And they saw in early Christianity and in the life of Jesus a different way to live. Economic justice, economic sharing, freedom of conscience, not being coerced to believe things you don't want to believe. And critically, and this is where the name comes from, they saw that baptism, which is sort of a sacrament that brings one into the Christian faith, they came to believe that step could only be taken by an adult who was able to make a decision on their own, that this was something that they wanted to do, and this was a value system by which they were going to live. And at the time, the Catholic Church, and to this day, the Catholic Church baptizes infants, and they said, well, there is no basis of support for that in the gospel, and it's a matter of they felt it was a way for the church to control people, and often for economic reasons, so that families would have to then pay tithes based on the number of people in their family. So that's kind of where Anabaptism came out of. They said, we don't actually feel like we need to follow these rules that have been in place and that have been told to us by the priests and those in authority. And they set out to create another life for themselves.
And the thing is, and for listeners, and Richard, like you correct me if I'm wrong, because, and I know you already mentioned it, but I've read most of the Bible, especially the New Testament. I don't remember seeing anywhere about, when a child is born, you baptize them. Because the thing is, and because the thing is, again, to clear John the Baptist was baptizing adults. And the other thing too is that in the New Testament, when talks about Jesus's life and so forth, Jesus was baptized when he was an adult, not when he was born in Bethlehem in a manger. So these Anabaptists. So again, so it just sounds like these Anabaptists are basically are kind of like going back to the original teachings of the Bible.
That's exactly right. That's what they saw themselves doing. They came to believe that the influence of power and of wealth in particular had caused the church to go astray. And they saw a lot of corruption in the church hierarchy. and they were determined to break away from that and try to be faithful to the scriptures as they read them. Their cry was sola scriptura, only the scriptures. So we're not interested in what other people have to say. What does the Bible have to say about it? And that was their only source of their only guide for the way they wanted to live their lives.
So, and then and I'm gonna, because I did a little bit of research on Anabaptists, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because I think there are three main beliefs: are discipleship, peacemaking, and recognizing the presence of Christ. Did you want to add anything to that, or
Yeah, that's a good summation. So I mean, they actually came up with a confession called the Schleitheim Confession around the time that this book takes place. So the 6 points of that are baptism. Baptism is administered only to those who have consciously chosen it.
Yes.
They believed in taking the Lord's Supper together, only of those who had been baptized as adults.
That's right.
They believe that the community of believers should be separated from the evil of the world, so they wouldn't be part of things that were wrong.
Yes.
And critically, they believed in Christian non-resistance, that violence should never be used in any circumstance, and that's something they stuck with.
Yes.
And they also believed that Christians should not take oaths. They should only say yes or no, and that's taken from the Sermon on the Mount, which people may be familiar with. Jesus, one of the most defining sermons Jesus gave. You can read it in the Gospel of Matthew.
Yes. No, thank you very much for that. I'm sorry. I'm gonna continue on, because I want to go back to, for by the water. May I ask, so thank you for giving me the background, information about Anabaptists. Their and like I said, I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to be respectful, but their beliefs, but I'm going to ask, may I ask, what is this graphic novel story about? We know it's about Felix Manz.
Well, the story really is about this young man who grew up. He was the bastard son of a priest. So he kind of grew up in a bit of a, his family wouldn't have been respected that much. He ended up going to university in Paris, where he's exposed to the ideas of people like Thomas More, Erasmus. He's reading, again, ad fontes, back to the sources, and really starting to think about what kind of world, is there a different way to live? Then he comes back to Zurich, and Zurich is in the middle of reform. There's a reforming priest there called Ulrich Zwingli, and he gathers this group of young men together. Felix Manz is one of them. Conrad Grebel, he's another character in the novel, is another, and they meet together regularly. We imagine them in the city sauna, sort of having these discussions together, and they're reading Homer in the original Greek, and importantly, they're reading the Bible together. And it's not really it's not sort of a pietistic reading of the Bible. It's how can we structure our lives in such a way that they reflect what Jesus taught. So Ulrich Zwingli is really, in some ways, a father figure to Felix Manz at this time, because as I mentioned, Felix never really had a father, and so he really looks up to Ulrich Zwingli. But then Zwingli, he starts to sort of become kind of a kingmaker in the local politics. He thinks he can make change through the state, through power. And Felix Manz and his friends say no. Jesus never used violence. We shouldn't either. They also bring up this point about baptism, that infants should not be baptized, only adults. And this is a step too far for Zwingli. And he eventually turns against his former protege and ends up siding with the Zurich Council in making laws against rebaptism, effectively making Felix and his friends outlaws. There's some brief moments of revival of where Felix and his friends go and persuade many people, inspire many people to follow their example. And there's this beautiful sequence where they're in this little village called Zalikon. You can see it in the Bible, where people are so inspired by what they're talking about that they break the locks off of their houses and their their drawers, and they share everything together, and it's kind of like this utopian experience, which is kind of interesting if you think of Thomas More's book Utopia, which was published in the early. So these people actually experienced it, but then this doesn't last long. The Council of Zurich really cracks down. Yes. They see this movement as a threat to their power and to their the control of the area, and eventually Felix ends up getting arrested and eventually then executed by drowning in the Limmat River, which runs through Zurich, for his beliefs.
Yes. Now, when after I read the story, I had to take a step back and really process it, and the fascinating thing. And I'm going to say, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or you can say, hey, no, Jason, that's not what we want. And I'm okay with that. But I thought Felix's story, because again, listeners, Felix, was a real life person. But I thought that Felix's story kind of sort of reflected what Paul went through in the New Testament. That's I could be wrong, because,
very much so.
Paul, that's what I just thought.
Very much so. I mean, these were both guys who, Paul the Apostle and Felix Manz. These were both people who, were able to see something greater than themselves and were able to devote their lives completely to it, and never give up what they believed in, despite being threatened with imprisonment and death. And Felix himself had many opportunities to renounce his beliefs, even as he was being rowed in the boat out to the site where he was then pushed off and drowned. There was someone there saying, listen, if you would just renounce what you believe and recant, then we can just let this go. But he refused to.
Yes.
And similarly, the Apostle Paul did the same.
Yes. And the other thing too was for me, and again, I took a step back, had processed the story, and then I also realized too that Felix had for Christians, Felix had a strong love for Jesus, and he died for Jesus. And it wasn't and again, it wasn't for some, it's the noble cause. It's, this is what, no, he died literally, for our King.
That's right.
Amazing. That's
right. And as he died, he used the same words of Jesus as he died on the cross. Into your hands I commend my spirit. That's in many ways he walked the Christian walk, the same walk that Jesus walked.
Yes, he did. Let's see. I know I'm kind of jumping a little bit more, and I'll come back to some of the questions that be like a process question. So, because I want to get to the point where Sokka's art, was it, because there's some scenes in the book, like, was it intentional for when in the last few pages, after Felix has drowned, his body was pulled out, from the water. They don't show it pulled out from the water, but and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the woman that's holding him is Felix's mother. Is that correct?
That's correct. His mother, Anna Manz.
And then the thing is that just the position of how she was holding Felix is it looks like these famous Catholic paintings of how Mary, was holding Jesus after they took him down from the cross. Was that intentional? Or did you guys? How did that come about? That one panel for Felix.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. That is that panel is in some ways to evoke the Pietà, Mary mourning over the body of her son Jesus after he's taken down from the cross. But this just points to other research that Jason did. He also really spent a lot of time digging into the art of this time period, into this medieval art, and you can just see how that influenced the way Sanka's art then turned out. And actually, you'll see in sort of the chapter breaks, listeners, when you get the book, we've interspersed some of this medieval art along with the art of the graphic novel, which I think is a really interesting and beautiful touch.
Yes, and then I'm going to touch upon a little bit in the back matter, a little bit towards the end of the interview, but because I remember in the back matter there was a painting of, what was it? I think how paintings were of how people look possessed or something,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that was there's some of the artwork, you know, in the book about that, like, oh, I think you're possessed, or I think Satan has gotten to you or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, did you want to comment on that, or, you know?
Well, I just think that's one thing I'm just so proud about this book is the level of detail and attention that went into the artwork. This is not, you know, this is a book that you can spend a lot of time just studying a page.
Yes.
And studying, you know, what the thought that went into the layout of each page. It's a real piece of craftsmanship. And again, so much of it is influenced by the art period, the art of that period of the 16th century.
And then another scene I want to mention, because and again, there's some visual scenes. Because I don't want to get too much into it, but because yeah, but I just want to pick out one more scene that I thought was great, and I loved how in the epilogue. Now there's a character named, I hope I'm pronouncing his name, George. Is that correct?
Yeah, George or Georg would be the
Okay.
German way to say it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then correct, was he like a farmer? I'm trying to remember.
Georg Blaurock, he was actually a priest, a former priest who ended up, again, like many of these men, renouncing the state church, renouncing the Catholic Church. So he was one of the founding members of the Anabaptist movement.
Because I love the ending where there is a scene where there's two panels where Georg, in his quote, shook the dust off his shoes and clothing over the city, and in Zurich, is that correct? The city? Am I pronouncing the city name?
Yeah, Zurich in Switzerland.
Zurich, and never returned. The thing I love about that is it sounds similar to a Bible verse.
Yeah. Yep. That's taken again. These men were well versed in the Bible, and you know, it was almost part of them. They were so, and that's one of Jesus' teachings to his disciples. He says, if a place doesn't welcome you, and reject you, shake the dust off your feet and walk out.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Richard. I mean, yeah, you know, listeners, like Richard said, you know, you could, you know, when you read this story, you know, there's so, you know, there's, you know, it's, you could take time just to look at the panels, you know, and just study it. You know, it's not just the pages, but also some of the text too as well. You know, because like I said, some of it I kept reading, you know, going, this sort of looks familiar, like a biblical verse, but it's not jumping straight on going, you know, this is from, you know, Mark chapter 2, or, you know, but it's just,
right.
Yeah. And it kind of almost shows that, that, you know, this is, you know, again, and you mentioned it, is that, you know, they're living out the Bible. They're not just talking about the Bible, or they're not just doing, you know, you should follow this verse, but they're living it out.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. And, you know, and hopefully that's conveyed also in the way the book is written. You know, these people were not trying to tell other people what to do per se.
Yes.
They were saying, this is what we've read. This is what we're going to do.
Yes.
And hopefully our example will speak to other people.
And that's the thing. And that's what it is too, even in the Bible. And, sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, and real quickly, I'm not, yeah, because again, the teachings of Jesus, whenever Jesus came up to, you know, a sinner, non-believer, he never condemned them. He didn't say, you're the woman at the well. He never told her, you are a sinner, you're an adulteress, you should be killed. He says, no, I can offer, she's offers him water, and he says something to the effect, I can give you everlasting water or something, something more,
Right, right.
He was kind to her, he was gentle to her. And the only time that Jesus was and whenever it was the Pharisees, he was always the one that's like, he would really get hard down on them,
Right, right, right. People who are convinced of their own righteousness and trying to tell other people what to do.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on okay. Well, then let me try to get back on track. Okay, so I'm gonna ask, how did you and Jason meet?
So Jason and I we've been friends for a long time, and I know he's been working on this project for a long time. And about a couple of years ago, he asked me to come on as scriptwriter, because he was in that place where he wanted to actually, get an outline or and so we've worked very closely together in that way. We're also both members of an intentional Christian community, so it's a group of people who live together, and we share all our money and everything.
Yes.
And in many ways, we live similarly. We try to live similarly to the way these people lived 500 years ago, obviously with some big differences, right? So we kind of have a similar background, and so the working together with Jason was just seamless. He's just fantastic with visual ideas, and and we just have a great collaboration.
I'm gonna touch upon I think I'm gonna touch upon I want to talk a little bit about the research part, because the other thing I love about this book is the back matter is incredible, because it shows that you guys respect, want to show respect to not only Felix, but also during the time of the Reformation as well, because you go through you do a character breakdown in the back pages, you do a timeline of this is this, and there's so much back matter. It's incredible. It's great. So if you don't mind me asking, what did your research contain? Because and I'm not being sarcastic, but it had to have been more than just looking through the internet. I mean, did you have actually did you have physical books where this is,
Yeah, we read a lot of books on Reformation history, and not just Reformation history, information about the time period. So there's one really interesting book called Diary of an Executioner, I believe it was called. It's basically the diary of an executioner from that time period that was discovered in some archives, where he just writes down about his daily work, torturing and killing people, which just kind of gives you an insight into how people thought about life and crime and punishment. We also read a lot of primary source material about the Anabaptists, interrogation records in archives in Germany and Switzerland. Obviously, their correspondence. They wrote a lot. They wrote a lot of songs that were then. They wrote a lot of songs while they were in prison, I guess, as poems that were then put to music. So you can learn a lot about how they thought from those. What else? A lot of just contemporary writing, primary source material. I would say was some of the most powerful material we had to work with, because you're not reading about it through an intermediary. You're reading the words of people at the time. So myself and Jason both just really spent a lot of time trying to get as close to what life must have been like back then, and how they, how the people back then must have been thinking and feeling as we could. Now, of course, you're never going to do a perfect job, but I think we got about as close as you can.
Oh, yes. I'm going to ask an off the cuff question, and it, and I'm trying to phrase it right, because I just thought of it was, do you think the people back in the whether do you see any similarities between people that were living in the times and today?
Yeah, well, I think that's actually what I find the most, inspiring part of working on this project is how contemporary the concerns these people had back then are to us today. I mean, so many people today are concerned about economic justice.
Yes.
So many people today are upset about coercive practices,
Yes.
where people are forced to do things against their will.
Yeah.
People want a different kind of society. They want a society where things that's more peaceful, that's more fair, where there's equality between people. And so I would just say that, yeah, I think many of the concerns that these people in the Radical Reformation had, they're the same concerns that many of us have today, whether you're a believing Christian or not.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Sorry, Richard, I'm going to continue. Thank you very much for that answer. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep kind of like moving along because I don't want to take too much of your time. So, how did you guys team up with Plough Publishing?
So Plou is Plou is a publisher of it's a Christian publisher, but they're also committed to a variety of formats and trying to spread ideas in different ways. And they've been experimenting with graphic novels. They have a novel on Nelson Mandela and on the White Rose, which is a resistance group to the National Socialists. They have, I believe they have one other. Oh, they have one on Martin Luther, interestingly enough, called Luther. So they had quite a bit of experience with publishing graphic novels, and it was just a great fit. The story was a great fit for them.
Before I start wrapping things up, because there's one, I just want to point out one thing to listeners. And I'm just going to ask an off the cuff question because it was so cool that in the back matter, there's a Jason has a picture of the mouth of a cave, and Sanka kind of like drew it that way too, because when I saw it in the book, I was like, oh, okay, all right. I was like, okay, and then I go to the back matter, and it's like, oh my God, Jason took a picture of it from someone taking a picture from inside the cave.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your thoughts when you saw, did Jason, when you saw that picture and Jason said, I think this is where, they may have like hid out,
Yeah, so while these radical reformers were being pursued by the authorities, they had to hide out in the woods. And one place that they found to hide out that we're almost 100% sure about was this cave. And Jason actually visited the cave when he was in Switzerland with his family and took photographs. And then Sanka based his artwork off of those photographs. So that's very cool.
It is. All right. I'm going to say, I know now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you guys are going to be working. There's 2 more volumes, right? By Fire and by Sword.
Right. This is the first of a trilogy. By Water, by Fire, by the Sword will be the 3 titles. And so this one is coming out this year, and I really hope listeners will be able to get a copy, and then hopefully the rest of the trilogy will be out within the next year or so.
Okay, all right. I'm going to ask, and you can, you can say I can't talk about or anything, but can you tell us what the next volume will be about, or the next, volumes 2 and 3? Can you give us a hint? Or
well, they're going to also be stories of people from this time period, of radical reformers and the different paths that they took, because they went to some very interesting places, and I think readers are going to be fascinated because these are stories that not many people know about.
Richard, thank you very much. I'm going to ask, before I start literally wrapping up the interview, do you want to add anything else? Add anything else about By Water? I mean, did we miss anything? Is there any anything else important you want to share?
No, I think what your questions have been great, and I feel like hopefully listeners have gotten a good idea of what to expect from this graphic novel. Please get yourself a copy. It'll make a beautiful addition to your library, and we're just thrilled to be able to put it out there.
All right. So now I'm going to ask you a couple light questions now because
good.
So do you are you guys planning any convention or book signing appearances in like March or April? And I'm looking in April when this is going to be April, May.
We're still working on a possible launch event in New York City that may happen in May or June.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working on that. Jason's actually already been at a couple book signings at some book conventions, which were great, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of them.
All right, and then Richard, have you and your family been to Hawaii?
It is a profound regret for me that I have never had the opportunity so far to come to Hawaii. I'm looking forward to that, and just need to find a good reason for it. Maybe we need to write a graphic novel about something that happens there.
There you go. Yes.
Come down there for some research.
Yes, there you go. All right. Any closing words to our listeners?
Well, just thanks so much for having me on, Jason. Thank you to your listeners for hearing me out. And again, please get the book. And it's been a real pleasure.
Richard, mahalo. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you. I wish you all the success with By Water, the Felix Manz Story. Again, I want to give Hannah of Superfan Promotions a big shout out for asking us to do this interview. And again, Hannah, just thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Richard, I'm sorry, it's off the cuff question. You want to add anything to that? You want to give a shout out to Hannah or anything?
Yeah, definitely. A huge shout out to Hannah and, David at Superfan. They've been great to work with. We've met so many great people as a result of our partnership, and thank you.
Now, if you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, please check out By Water, the Felix Manz Story. I'm going to be honest with you. This graphic novel, and you've heard me say it throughout the interview, this will make you think. It's and Richard, please forgive me. I'm not being sarcastic, and please don't take this wrong. But this is not our light reading, because listener, Richard and Jason, have put, it shows that they've done the research. The back matter is incredible. It's, again, it's filled with, who these characters are, timelines, and extra added material. It's very incredible. Now, some of you may, readers, if you pick up this book, some of you may find it interesting because it deals with a lot of religious history from the 16th century. Some of you may find it inspirational because the main character died for what he believed in and practiced. And some of you who believe in Jesus, the story of Felix may strengthen your faith. The other thing too, I'm going to encourage families, to pick up this graphic novel and read it with your children, because this is in some way, it maybe I'm wrong to say this, but it could like enhance the Bible readings in your family during those times, because this is because again, Felix lived his life for Christ. He
did.
And then I want to thank Drew, the co-host of Comics for Fun and Profit, for putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. If you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. I want to thank you, listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys. Aloha.
Aloha.
In a world ravaged by war and chaos, a group of survivors must band together to brave the dangers of a post-apocalyptic landscape. The year is 2000, and the world has been plunged into darkness. The nuclear fires have burned out, leaving behind a wasteland of ruins and radiation. But amidst the rubble and despair, a glimmer of hope still remains. Join Dork Day Afternoon as they face off against marauding gangs, enemy soldiers, and even the harsh elements themselves in the world of Twilight 2000. Will our heroes survive the challenges ahead? Can they keep their own humanity intact? Or will they succumb to the harsh realities of life after the end of the world? 2 past midnight. An actual play podcast by Dork Day Afternoon.